My problem wasn't the cancer, it was the aloneness. And if I long for anything in my life, it's connection. I'm trained as a psychologist, and I've done 2 master's degrees and a doctorate. And in all of my training, telling your own story is like a big no-no. The whole purpose of this is hopefully to help other people feel less alone in these complicated moments in our lives, where we all let go of all of that fear and bullshit and just exist together as our most authentic, flawed, gorgeous, fucked up selves. When we can be ourselves, we have the best and most perfect chance at connection. I'm Sarah Schmidt, and this is Holy Schmidt, Season 1. Nobody will ever be or has ever been a perfect parent. But in pursuit of understanding our hurts or wounds or traumas, we tend to blame our parents without considering why they couldn't show up for us like we needed them to. In this episode, we're going to talk about my ever-evolving and complicated relationship with my mom. As you might remember from the last episode, my mom's inability and her struggle to show up for me during my cancer experience was one of the most painful times of my life. And yet, we've grown to have a close, supportive, beautiful relationship today. And she's even going to be on the podcast soon. Things like inner child work and nurture versus nature have become commonplace in this self-help zeitgeist. But with this, they're often quick to vilify our parents, especially when it comes to looking back at painful childhood memories that still feel like they impact us today. We have to remember that our parents are just humans too. And they probably did the best they could with the tools and the self-knowledge that they had at the time. Even though it can be really hard to put your resentments aside, I can tell you from firsthand experience that giving my mom permission to grow and transform instead of continuing to blame her for the ways she fell short has become one of the biggest gifts to me and my family. And I want to offer a disclaimer. If your parents showed up for you in unforgivable ways that warrant you cutting them out of your life, I want to fully support you in doing that with complete and total confidence. But if your parents tried their best and their best meant something short of what you needed, something in the camp of emotionally unavailable, leaving you with some baggage and some patterns to sort through, then I'm talking to you. As I became a parent and my mom became a grandparent, I got to see a completely different side of her. I got to see the loving, caring, unburdened, uncomplicated love that she really had to offer. My own parenting journey involved me coming to realize that my mom had a lot of shit that she was dealing with too as a parent. As I navigated parenthood, I was really able to reflect on what her navigation of parenthood was like, how mine was different, how in some ways mine was easier. Very few people take a class in how to be a parent. Unless you've adopted a child, it's likely that you never took a class about parenting. We had those classes, and even with them, they weren't super helpful. My mom parented at a time when people didn't really talk about how to parent. Beginning to understand her perspective created a lot of empathy and space within me. And that was probably the beginning of a new phase in our relationship. So all that being said, today we're going to dive into my mom's story, at least my understanding of it, and what made her the mom she was. I hope that hearing a bit of our story will inspire you to extend some of that empathy to your loved ones too. And I want to add, if your parents have passed, you can still hold them in your heart and extend these feelings toward them. There's capacity to heal with a loved one who has passed. We could still be in relationship with them. I hope you really enjoy this episode. Near the end, we're going to talk about some ways to take some of these lessons into our real lives and carry them forward. My mom might disagree with me on this. I hope she does, because I think the conversation would be so terrific to have. My experience of her and her mother and her grandmother was of women who were lonely, were kind of struggling, there wasn't a lot of like joy and exuberance and lightness and that kind of energy in my relationship with my grandmother or my great-grandmother, either grandmother on both sides. When I was around them, I always had a sense that life was hard, really hard. Not bad, but just hard. There was a sense of tiredness from that, being kind of worn down. And my grandfather was this wildly creative man whose passion was music. He had an amazing singing voice. He played a whole bunch of instruments. We have recordings of him performing with a band. He would play for weddings and maybe like supper club kinds of things. But that wasn't enough to make ends meet and support this family of 14 children. So he worked in all these other jobs, including he tried to be a farmer. I think he was like a machinist. I remember her saying he did janitorial work at the grade school, their Catholic grade school, which is why they got like a reduced or free tuition, really trying to support this massive family. My grandfather had a lot of pain in his body. He was terribly arthritic. My memories of him are in his chair listening to Brewer games. Watching him get out of a chair was agonizing. Every joint in his body hurt. And my grandmother was always in the kitchen cooking something, but I don't have any memories of laughing with her or playing with her or of any kind of like lightness with her. And we weren't around her as much as we were my dad's family, but around her enough that I think I would have seen it. She will talk about her childhood, and it's lovely from the stories. She was with her mom and her dad. There was a lot of music in their house. There was like the garden, and there were animals, and there was a lot of like shenanigans with her brothers and sisters. But there was a certain amount of scarcity, and a certain amount of struggle and a lot of joy with what they had. But her role from a young age was to help take care of all of these babies. And there were a lot of them. We used to have this little like competition with my siblings and I to see how fast we could say every name of all of her siblings and how many seconds it would take. I can do it like lightning speed. Diane, Barbara, David, Peter, Tom, Jerry, Joe, Susie, Billy, Mary, Jeannie, John, Mark, Richard. She's Barbara, number 2. And we used to time ourselves and see who could say it the fastest. I haven't done it in a really long time, but you know how like things just roll off your tongue. When her brother David was 21, he died in a motorcycle crash. It was a terrible accident on a snowy, icy day. It was devastating to the family. There just was a lot of hard things, I think, in their lives. But it wasn't unusual. It was like everybody's experience in their community, I think. These were big families in like a rural part of Wisconsin, all trying to raise these like large Catholic families during this time in our country's history. My mom and her siblings went to this little Catholic school together. And I think, again, like I said, I think my grandpa had some job there that gave them like the ability to go to school. But when it was time for high school, they weren't going to be able to afford sending her to high school. So she had 2 options. She could go to public school, but her older sister, who she felt very much like in the shadow of, her older sister was quite talented and I guess amazing organist and like had beautiful penmanship. I remember her saying she had beautiful penmanship. Her older sister chose to go to the convent. My mom was super shy and did not want to go to public school like alone and be the first. So she followed her sister to the convent. So after 8th grade, she had just turned 14. She left home and she joined the convent. I was just with her like 2 weeks ago, and she was talking about the first night they were there. And they were immediately put into like a study hall. She described it as the nun. I forget her name. Oh, she had a great name, like Bonaventure or like some, really big like nun name. Started reading some Bible verses to them that was like, you have now put your hand to the plow and you will not look back. she remembered this sense of like, ooh, feeling like real important and terrified at the same time. Ooh, this is a big deal, but what do you mean I can't look back? I have I'm 14 and I'm like little girl with a family. And they read some things that said like, you no longer have father or mother. We are your parents. These are your siblings. You no longer have siblings. And there was this real, like, the cord was cut and she was on her own. In families that were Catholic at that time, like the highest calling you could get as a parent would be a child who chose a religious vocation, became a priest or a nun. If you had a family of 14 and you couldn't turn out a nun and a priest, at least two, there's something really wrong with you. There's a lot of pressure on families to like cultivate these vocations. As a parent, if you felt like this wasn't the right decision for your child, you were in no position to say no, because this was a vocation, right? This was like the highest calling. And I know my grandparents did not want their two daughters to leave. So my mom spent her adolescent, like those like critical years. Think about what like happens for kids in like high school. She spent them in that environment. They were called brides of Christ and they married Jesus. There's a beautiful picture of her wearing her outfit, her dress, her wedding dress, flowers and the whole bit and a little veil. They took new names. They had to change their name. You got to submit 3 names and they chose one for you. You were given a uniform and you were given a bed and you were given a little tiny dresser, but you only had like 1 or 2 changes of clothes and like just the littlest amount, because you took a vow of poverty. So the littlest amount of everything. If my grandparents were to send my mother a gift, it went to the whole community. Like, I guess they used to send her like pajamas, like a nice robe or something. She never got any of it. It went into like a closet, and then as someone needed something, it was pulled out and given to them, regardless of who it was meant for. So this sense of like, I have nothing, and now I maybe am nothing, except what I see before me, which is this commitment, to a life, and I'm 14 and I'm going to make that commitment now. My mom stayed, I think she was 25 when she left. So I think it was 11 years. I think she talks about spending about a year or 2 trying to convince them she really didn't want to leave. I guess they took vows in cycles of 3 years, and they were trying to convince her to stay for the 3-year cycle, and she had just taken the vows. And at the time that she was doing it, she kind of knew she shouldn't be doing it. It was like, okay, fine, I'll have a beer. There was a certain pressure she felt. So she took that vow for those 3 years, and then she decided at the end of the first year to break it. It was a lot of pressure for her not to. We were just driving a couple days ago, and she told me that when she made the decision, they could tell no one, and one of the sisters took her on a train to Milwaukee to shop for clothes because she had no clothes to wear when she left. She only had her uniform, and they were wearing a black, think Sound of Music, Wimple, the whole thing at that time. But they had to go all the way to Milwaukee to shop because they couldn't shop locally, because no one could know that she was leaving. Like, the shame of your leaving. We'll do this in secret. She had $100 to spend because her parents had to give, I believe, $100, like a dowry, when she entered. Something like that. She had $100 to spend. She had 3 dresses when she left at 25. She'd started her life. She'd learned how to drive. She had a college degree. She had been teaching since she was 21. She was a teacher. So she was a teacher. She had that. So there was a period of time like in the summer or during like holidays where she could go home for like a week or 2 at a time. And then I believe that like every time my grandma had a baby, my mom got to go home for 2 weeks to help her. So she would help with the little ones while my grandma was in the hospital. Because at that time, when a woman had a baby, she got to stay in the hospital for 2 weeks, which, sounds insane, right? We get like 2 days if you're lucky. There wasn't like a long summer break where she was home for like a great big period of time. She knew she wanted to leave probably like just prior to that last set of vows. I think she questioned whether she wanted to be there the entire time she was there. I think that was running through her mind. And there's lots of things about it that just weren't right to her, weren't easy. It's hard to deny a calling. Sometimes you don't know, right? You don't know because Jesus might know more than you. You got to go with it. I think it took about 2 years until she actually left. And she credits one nun in particular who really helped her and supported her. And I remember meeting Sister Paulette. She's a lovely, lovely woman. I remember going to the mother house to visit with her and meeting and seeing some of my mom's other friends. There are 2 of her nun friends that use this cabin every summer for their vacation. They were truly like sisters to her. I'm not sure how much pressure she really felt right when she left to get it all together. I really think my grandparents would have given her quite a bit of leeway and space. She had to find a job because she had to support herself. She got a teaching job. Then she needed an apartment. Oh my God. She talks about the cost of her first apartment and her first contract for teaching and how she had so much money and made it work, for 12 months with the summers off. And she speaks about that time with so much joy and pride. That she was really forced to pave her way and figure things out. And she did it with great success. And she was quite happy. She had a roommate and they were both teachers. And, she started dating a little bit. That was a great part of her life. She was teaching, it's called CCD. So it's Catholic education for kids that go to public school. She was teaching that in a little town close to where my dad lived and close to where she had an apartment. And the priest there thought that he knew my dad well. It was just down from where he worked. He thought that they should meet. And so he sent my dad my mom's phone number. He called her and she was making chocolate chip cookies for her kids, her students, to have the last day before Christmas vacation. He came over to her apartment to taste her cookies. Okay, can't make this shit up, can you really? I know. They had their first date on December 10th, and they married on June 10th. And I believe the proposal was something like, now here's the plan. I thought we could get married on June 10th. When we were writing my dad's obituary, it was so sweet. My mom, I said to her, what is it about him that just... Yeah, how'd you know he was the one? She said I could talk to him about anything. I thought that was lovely, So they hardly knew each other and they were married 6 months later. But that isn't that uncommon. I mean, I've heard these stories from other friends of mine whose parents, of that era. And my dad was 5 years older than her. He was the one getting the pressure to get married. My grandmother was praying rosaries so that he'd find someone, And he was still living at home with his parents. And so they married in June of 1970. Shortly thereafter, got pregnant. And my dad actually moved her into his duplex that he and his brothers owned. He moved her into half of it prior to their marriage and furnished the whole thing. And then he moved in after the wedding, right? So they were living there. It's hilarious. She says that he gave his sister some money and to take my mom shopping to furnish the house. Just simple and straightforward and very efficiently. And super excited about having a baby. Will Billy ever have children, and all this kind of stuff was a big question for the whole family. And my grandmother used to say, oh, she's the one I prayed for. When she was 6 months pregnant in 1971, she had a miscarriage. And it was devastating. And I think it was most devastating because at that time, nobody talked about miscarriage. Nobody talked to her about it. She was sedated, delivered. The baby was whisked off. She never saw him. No one ever talked to her about it. And then it was just unspoken. There was just no way to process that, to call it out. And then to make matters the worst, they told her that it was because she had an incompetent cervix. That was the medical diagnosis. They named the baby William. My father chose a casket and he's buried in the cemetery right next to him. I only know this was so traumatic because this little baby's presence and existence shadowed our lives. You have to pick a pin for your debit card and your garage door opener and your security system, and that number was his birthday my whole life. As my dad got older and he started dealing with some health issues, on more than one occasion, he would introduce us in a group and he'd be like, these are 2 of my 4 children. And I'd be like, who's the 4th? And it would be Willie, My mom would call me on his birthday and be like, Willie would be 21 today, or Willie would have been 50 today. It was a really, really, really big deal. There was no vocabulary for miscarriage in 1970. And I think people thought that if you just ignore it, it'll go away, right? You just have another one. Every pregnancy after that, she had to be on bed rest 23 hours of the day from like 3 or 4 months on. The stress and the anxiety and the pressure and the worry of like when she was pregnant with me, what that was like to be like hoping this was going to work out this time. And then you're laying in bed for 23 hours a day with nothing to do but think about it and like crochet. Her like launch into motherhood was really rocky and fraught with a lot of, I think, anxiety and pressure and grief and sadness and loss and excitement and all of it all mixed together with no one there to like help you process it, talk about it, acknowledge it. And she had this whole like decade and a half prior where we aren't going to really talk about the hard things. We're just going to push through. Come on, hand to the plow. Just keep looking forward. I just wish that I could like jump back several decades and like, okay, let's change the narrative here. Let's talk about this. I don't think there was a lot of conversation with her by like her family or my dad's family. I mean, my dad's family, there's not a lot. We don't talk about a lot of stuff. So I know it didn't happen there. I just don't know how much she got to really say about how she felt about things. It took a little while for this to kind of coalesce for me, but the only thing I could kind of figure out that would explain to me why it was so hard for her to really just dive in and just really be there for me is that the trauma of losing that baby was so triggered by my own illness. I just think both she and my dad, because my dad wasn't any better at talking to me about it. If anything, he was worse. They couldn't face that loss again. And so, I mean, they just did what they do and they just pushed through, keep going, on to the next. The fact that they hardly told anyone in my family that I was sick, I think says so much about their own ability to process grief, sadness. Fortunately for me, my entree into motherhood was so non-traditional that I stumbled into and then intentionally like created this way of being a mother to a little human who I met, right, when she was 2 and just fell in love with and wanted to be a mother figure in her life. And that was my first experience of mothering. So different. Had I had a more traditional experience of like getting pregnant and having a baby, I think I would have had to wrestle with a lot of things, but I sidestepped it. I mean, I didn't intentionally sidestep, but I sidestepped it. By that time, I'd also done so much therapy. Oh my God, hours of therapy, really processing so many of the things that had happened in my life. And I think I was in a slightly different place with being able to think and talk and experience grief and sadness and loss. And I begun the process of trying to heal some of this stuff. It wasn't until I was 44 years old that I actually birthed a child. And by that time, I had another, 10, 12 years of work. But I will tell you that experience of birthing that baby was, amazing, right? Okay, everybody says having a baby is amazing. Honestly, the actual experience of having a baby, not so amazing. But I gave birth to him in the hospital where I was treated for cancer. Intentionally. I walked into that hospital, a cancer survivor, and I walked out with a newborn. And I had a whole new way of looking at that place, right? And experiencing that place. As I was laboring, I would just walk. And I remember walking past the doors of the Kellogg Cancer Care Center while I was in labor with him. And I was like, oh, this is like perfect. God willing, this is going to shift like a major narrative for me. I also got to do something with my body, which helped me to really like see it in a totally different light. Instead of being this thing that failed me and was so miserably flawed and scarred and just traumatized by what I went through, it built a human, right? And the experience of like literally like being pregnant and then giving birth to him was like, holy shit, this body is like, or, holy Schmidt, this body is like amazing and look what it can do. And I was a rock star in the like delivery room. So it was really great. I'm really glad that was the case because that was really transformational. Then I nursed him for 17 months. So then it was like, not only did my body do this, but now it's going to keep him alive. To add insult to injury, I also can keep a human alive for 17 months just on my own physical self. It was huge. During that time, I thought to myself, God, what would it have been like if my mom could have worked through her own grief and then had me, or been in the process of working through it and then had me? I just think, holy cow, that would just have been so amazing for her. Because once I think she was in the throes of parenting, it was one kid and then 2 years later, another kid, and then 2 years later, another kid, and like all on her own and doing everything by herself. When would she have come up for air to like do that? And no one in her like cohort would have been saying like, I've been going to therapy lately and I've been really processing all of the grief and trauma that happened to me in my childhood. Like nobody talked like that. So there wasn't a template for it. 2 years ago, it's almost to the day, because we were together for Labor Day weekend and she went home and a day later, she had a massive heart attack. So it's almost to the day 2 years ago. She had a massive heart attack. We'd been together for Labor Day weekend. I called her the day before. How'd the drive home go? All's good. The next day, my brother calls me. Mom's going to that emergency room. I think she had a heart attack. We find out later in the day as I'm driving up there that not only did she have a massive heart attack, the widowmaker, right? But her septum wall between her two left and right ventricles has been like ruptured. This is like serious shit. This isn't just a heart attack. She's on a heart pump now. So her heart is no longer capable of keeping her body alive. Now she's on a pump to do it. Then we find out she needs this like really intense surgery and she's got to be in an ICU environment where they have ECMO equipment. And where can we find that? And the COVID cases are at an all-time high and there's literally not an ICU bed in the Midwest available. So by like the grace of God and a whole bunch of connections, we find a bed, we airlift her on an airplane to the hospital and we get her there. And now she's in the ICU for several weeks. The heart recovers enough to do the surgery. And then she comes home to live with me for 3 or 4 weeks to like learn to walk again. I mean, it just was amazing what this experience did to her physically. A couple of things happened there for me. Like one, it was really hard because we had lost my dad and I just didn't think this was I just thought we were going to get a little bit of a reprieve. But caring for her during that time, because I was the one closest to her physically. I mean, she was a mile from my house. I went there every day. I cooked all the food she ate. She came back to me. I mean, I literally like, my sister was incredibly supportive. My brother was supportive, but I was there. It was like right down the street. But I cared for her. And I did it out of this place of like true, like I wanted to do it. I didn't feel like I had to. It didn't feel like a burden. I just wanted to. I wanted to take care of her. And I did it in the hospital where I had cancer treatment. So like, I thought I was going to die there. I birthed a baby there. And then they saved my mother's life. It was just amazing. And since that time, I mean, I don't know, you want to talk about a heart opener? Here's one. A heart attack. She and I have been able to have so many conversations about things that were so hard. And I look at the way she's tackling them now and the courage that she has. I mean, at 81 years old, I just don't think it's that easy. I don't think it's easy at any age, but the older you get, I think the harder it is. The longer you put it off, I would like to argue that I think it gets harder. And I see her just being willing to face hard things. Like really do them, not just talk about it, but do them. And I see the way she's like supporting my healing and how that's supporting her healing. And I mean, it's truly, I don't know, they talk about how being a mother is like the most important thing you might ever do. I think the way she parents, the way she is parenting today, the grandmother that she is, I mean, it's extraordinary. And I wouldn't want to change really any of it. I mean, there are things I'd like to change a little bit. She and I wouldn't have the relationship we have without all the things that make us who we are, right? And I'm just grateful that I have a mom that is willing to go there with me now in her own way, on her own time. And I really just have this like deep hope. We were just in Ireland for a week and we got to there was a lot of time to talk and tell stories. And I thought, God, I need to hear them all again. I just need to hear them all again because I'll hear them differently. And she might tell them differently too. I have a friend who has a really complicated relationship with her dad and her mom. It's been this big secret kept, and it's just infected everything about their relationship. And I think it's really affected her health and her own parenting. She's an amazing, beautiful human. And she wants to talk to her dad because she's seen the connection between keeping the secret and the tension and the conflict and the angst and her own physical health. She's so worried. She said to me, I'm worried he's just going to have a heart attack. I said, well, that won't be your fault. If he's going to have a heart attack because you share something hard, it's because his heart was really in bad condition. And, it could have been that, or he could have been rear-ended and it could have startled him and he could have died. So I'm like, you have these two options, right? You keep living like this, knowing that this is something that's really affecting you profoundly and in really significant ways, or you just take this risk. And I just think it's really important that we try to embrace the idea that everyone has the capacity to grow and change, and that everyone fundamentally wants to. I really do believe that. That's the human condition. We want to grow. We want to be better. We want to evolve. We want to heal. I just think there's this instinct. We're born like that. And then it never leaves us. It just gets sidelined. We can do such hard things, really do them, and come out on the other end better. To really grow, to really be the person you want to be, you have to put yourself in really uncomfortable situations, conditions, kind of test your mettle. There's too many things that get in the way of us from actually acting on it sometimes. Mostly fear, all kinds of weird cultural shit, whatever. But I think humans are just more resilient than we give ourselves credit for. So, how do we start to have empathy for our parents and build a new relationship with them going forward? Taking some time to reflect on why your parents showed up the way they did, for instance. If they were super critical of you, imagine how their parents might have treated them. Consider how you might redefine your relationship with them. How can you have boundaries but still find ways for connection? I think one of the hardest things to do as an adult is to develop an adult relationship with our parents. It requires one of us stepping outside that parent-child role and fully inhabiting our adult selves, being clear about what we want, what we'll stand for, what we won't stand for, and modeling a different way of engaging with one another. It takes a lot of work at times, and sometimes it requires work over, many months, if not years. But I really feel like the adult relationships that I now have with my parents, and I'm speaking about my dad too, who died 7 years ago. We are truly adults in relationship with one another. And that is one of the greatest gifts in my life. So much of those childhood hurts and wounds revolve around unmet needs. And I think a key piece of this effort of moving forward and moving beyond is really asking yourself, is it appropriate for me to expect that need to be met now that I'm an adult? Is there another person in my life, in my community, who can meet that need for me? Is that a need I need to meet for myself? Being very clear with yourself and with your parents, with the adults that you're working on healing with, is really important. I think so much of what we're talking about here is a letting go, a really being able to let go of the disappointment and knowing that you can never go back and do it again. It'll never be the same. And yet, being okay with that. Can we move forward in our lives with the knowledge that things weren't as good as maybe they could or should have been? Can we take that with us into our lives and just move forward with it? So often I think we let hurt keep us from moving forward. Like this idea that I have to fully heal before I can do anything else. And from my perspective, healing is about living your life with the things you struggle with, taking them with you into the, daily routine of your life and developing a new relationship with them. Yes, my mom disappointed me, and I understand why. And because I've been able to grow with her and stay open to the possibility that she can be there for me, I have countless other examples of her being supportive and loving. Another idea that you might consider is to make a list of all the things that you love about your parents, just to remind yourself of the good things that they did, the good people that they are, maybe the good intentions that they probably had. Please know that I'm not saying we need to forgive and forget. Forgetting is nearly impossible. And forgiveness looks different for every person. Forgiveness might be a truly beautiful, reconciling conversation where there are acknowledgments and promises and intentions set. But it might also just be your decision to move forward. I really believe that forgiveness looks different for everybody. We have to define it in our own terms and allow it to happen on our own timeline. I think forgiveness also requires a willingness to forgive ourselves for our own shortcomings, for our own struggles, before we can often offer it to others. Every episode, I encourage you to let go of something and welcome in something good too. Together, I'd like to encourage that we stop freezing our parents at the point at which they hurt us. And let's just welcome in the belief that everyone has the capacity for change. And if you'd like to hear more on this topic, please join me next week, where you're going to hear my mom tell her own story and the two of us talk about ours. If any of this resonated with you, we'd love for you to join our community. Subscribe to get first access to next week's episode. And please follow us on Instagram to continue this really important conversation at Holy Schmidt. WHOLEYSCHMIDT.